congregation ask for something like that. And I've heard of instances like that, but generally speaking, you might, if you don't have these types of accommodations, you just might make it up when you get home from school. And then in work, you just take a break. People do it in their cube, I know. Get a conference room. It probably depends on your work. I know like there were some headlines about there's a lot of Somali refugees that came in the early 90s and they were working in kind of meat packing plants in Minnesota. There's a lot of them in Minnesota that settled there. And they asked for breaks from like meat packing companies. And there the question is it's a little bit dirty where they work, so they'll have to like go to a break room and take a break or something like that. But I think people just kind of figure it out. Like taxi drivers or something, they might just do it while they're sitting in their car, which is allowed. Any other questions? So Muslim holy sites. So I thought about this slide. I'm taking this to mean like religious sites. Think the difference between Via Dolorosa versus Notre Dame Cathedral. These are like the religious sites. Understand the difference or with my analogy there? Like we can go to like cool churches, but they don't really have religious significance to Christianity. Vice, going to the Via Dolorosa or things like this, which are actual rooted in the story of Christianity. So, this is not like the Taj Mahal or anything like that. These are literally the Muslim holy sites from a religious rather than cultural point of view. I think folks know Mecca, even if they don't know. We use the word in English, Mecca, as like a place people, gather or do stuff, right? We believe Mecca, not Mecca the city, but the Kaaba, the black cube that you see in pictures, what people go around when they do Hajj. Folks kind of familiar with what I'm talking about there? Was built by Abraham. If you really, like from a Christian perspective, this is the story of Abraham and Hagar when they were basically cast out. He went to the desert with Hagar. Hagar couldn't find water. There's a story, one of the rituals when we do Hajj is reenact Hagar actually searching for water. And they found the well of Zamzam. And that's what saved Ishmael. It's very common for Muslims to actually, when you know somebody's going to Hajj, they come and bring Zamzam back for you. That was the well that saved Ishmael, and we drink that water. So it's like, people got their little water bottles that they bring us, like, hey, I brought some Zamzam for you. This is all in Mecca. So it's the city that the Prophet was born in. It's the city that Abraham and his son, Ishmael, built the Kaaba. And basically, Muhammad's mission was to restore the worship that Abraham did originally back to the city of Mecca, because it was actually taken over by polytheists. And it's the direction that every Muslim prays in. So in North America, we generally pray to the northeast. But Indonesia is going to have a different direction, but they all pray toward the Kaaba in Mecca. And it's where we perform Hajj, where we're encouraged to do once in our life. Medina just literally means city. But it became so famously known as Medinatun Nabi, city of the Prophet, that became its name. The interesting thing to know about Islam, I think, a lot of times when we talk about dates, the Muslim calendar has nothing to do with the Prophet's life, like his death or his birth. The Muslim calendar starts when the Muslims moved from Mecca, where they were being persecuted. They were put under embargo. No one was allowed to trade with them. They slaughtered camels for meat. They used to throw all the offal and the intestine and the guts on top of him when he prostrated in front of the Kaaba. They tried to assassinate him. They were not very nice to him, so they all had to flee to Medina. And this marks the beginning of the Muslim calendar. It was when the Prophet could start his community. When the Muslims, they set aside ties of kinship. This was a tribal society, and there were husbands and wives that were split, but they left to go live with the Prophet when he finally did make the move to flee to Medina. And that is Hijri calendar year 1. It's also the burial place of the Prophet. So there's a big mosque in Medina that when people go to Hajj, sometimes they will go and they will tour. They will go to both Mecca and Medina. And the third holiest site in Islam is Jerusalem. Muslims actually did pray during the time of the Prophet. They did pray toward Qibla. Qibla is the direction of prayer, where they actually did pray toward Jerusalem for about a period of a year. And then God actually, in Revelation, changed it to Mecca. Jerusalem is also the site of Muhammad's night journey to Al-Aqsa. This is called Isra wa Miraj. The Prophet in one night, the story goes, he ascended to heaven and led all the other prophets in prayer, and he actually had a conversation with all of them. So these three, and this is not something I'm super knowledgeable about, so I'm just going to tell you the title and stop there. So if there's questions about that, I don't have answers, but these are the three holy cities in Islam, to answer that question. Any questions?
Have you been to Mecca?
I have not. No, nor has my wife. What a lot of people historically, they go kind of when they're older, and then among, let's say, my cohort, a lot of people try to do it before they have kids, so they get married. It's not really a honeymoon. That's probably the wrong expression. But in that honeymoon period, let's say the first 2 years, a lot of couples try to actually go before they have kids. It's a lot easier to do. Because it is, even with airfare, even with buses, and the Saudis have spent a lot of money. They have a lot of huge cities of umbrellas almost to say, where shade, to give shade over a wide area. It's still an arduous journey. It's still, it's very taxing. There was a question about Ramadan and Muslim festivals. So I'm going to say, a lot of people like to compare Ramadan to Christmas. And it's true it's an expression of public worship, let's say, or this is kind of when you kind of burst at the seams, and it's something that Muslims do that people can kind of take note. So in that sense, it makes sense that it's akin to Christmas. But in another sense, it's not. There's no kind of analog between the two. Ramadan is a month-long, I think folks kind of know, it's where you fast from sunup to sundown. So you wake up early in the morning, you eat, you do not eat or drink, and the second bullet there and the sub-bullets there. So there's difference of opinion here, I'll say. Some people, they just fast. They're like, oh God, this stinks. I'm just not going to eat. I'm not going to drink, but I'm going to be a terrible person all day. That's not really the point. But in kind of a bare minimum literal truth, that's what you do have to do. You don't smoke, you can't take medicine, so if you do have to actually ingest medicine, you will break your fast that day. You can't be intimate. I don't necessarily want to unpack the details of that, but for instance, I might not give my wife a smooch either, because your job is to focus on the fast. Foul language, you can't be impatient, going back to being hungry and hangry and cranky, can't do that. And idle pastimes, you try to limit your TV, your music, gossip, things like this. But I will say, this exists kind of on a gradient. You have to kind of understand that on the literal level, it's food and drink, and the medicine thing, those I think all exist on the literal level. But all the other stuff there, it's kind of, God tells us is to increase taqwa, another hard word to translate. It's translated as God consciousness. And I think that's a good phrase to talk about it. Taqwa, it's good to be, or we all try to be good people, but how do we be good people under a little bit of duress? That'll teach you quick. but it's also, there's an immediacy of your hunger that you cannot escape, and it's that consciousness, that constant grind of this, that will remind us of what we're there to be doing. So that's what Ramadan tries to give you. It's almost a boost, it's an injection of an understanding of what we're here for. And it's the fact that there's a phrase, there's words in Arabic called dunya and akhira. Dunya refers to this world. Akhira refers to the world in the hereafter, life in the hereafter. We spend a lot of time focusing on the dunya. It's like, oh, I need to refinance. Mortgage rates are dropping, so I got to refinance my mortgage. You know, it's like, oh, yada, yada, yada. But what are you doing for the next world? Are your good deeds, in the scale, are your good deeds outweighing your bad deeds? And Ramadan forces you to reflect on that reality. You're preparing your 401k for retirement, but what about that next one? You know, so I think the Charles Schwab kind of analogy probably drives that home. So what are you doing? Are you increasing that 401k? So don't watch TV, don't be listening to music, but go recite Quran, go, do the tasbih, do the rosary, memorize a new surah, memorize one of the long ones that you've been procrastinating on and hadn't done it for 20 years. That's the time for Ramadan to do it. And then hopefully, the hope is that you'll be carrying that kind of behavior into after Ramadan. And then, there's ways to look at it like Ramadan is, oh, we all got to be good Muslims, and then I'm going to forget about it once Ramadan rolls past. I'm like, yeah, we're going to go back to kind of cussing each other out and backbiting and stuff like that. We don't want to do that. We want to kind of, every Ramadan, you get better and better and better and better, and it becomes cumulative and it stacks. Yes, ma'am.
Or the very young, or
Yep.
especially when you talk about medications, people have to take cholesterol every day or whatever it is, right? Or insulin.
Absolutely correct. So books of fiqh. So people hear about Sharia, people hear about Islamic law. Islamic law, lots is written about this. Ladies who are on their monthly stuff, elderly. The insane, when we talk about categories of, like, the jurists talked about all these things. Pre-modern society, we talked about adulthood, or the age of majority is usually puberty. Modern time, we talk about 18, but 18 didn't exist, as a concept, in 1400. But generally speaking, children do not fast. As I said, pre-modern, it was like by the time, they reached the age of majority, they would start. But even then, like in a modern American society, maybe it's not puberty, it's high school. Maybe it's, I don't know what. But parents kind of decide when they're going to start doing that thing. But to answer the literal question about dispensation, yes, tons of them, as we said. So what do ladies do, for instance, every month? They would do the tasbih, they would do the rosary, they would do things, other forms of worship outside of the fast. The elderly, cholesterol medication, yes, absolutely, they do not fast. They figure out other ways to gain the benefits of Ramadan. And believe it or not, people are sad when they cannot fast. I mean, it probably waxes and wanes, but Ramadan is a very special time, and it's even a time when we're encouraged to fast all year long, and we think it's so hard other parts of the year, but then when Ramadan happens, somehow it's made easy. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
More of a comment. I recently heard a female speaker over at the Islamic Center beautifully express her perception of Ramadan. And she said, I consider Ramadan to be an opportunity to rebuild muscle memory in my soul.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
We have about 5 minutes.
Oh, then. Yes, sir.
You had spoken about the grace of Allah.
Yes, sir.
How do you relate that to forgiveness of sins or trespasses?
I want to answer this question, so I'm not going to talk about the two major holidays in Islam. So, major sources of legislation in Islam are the Quran and the Hadith. There's a Hadith about think there's two that I'm jamming up in my head, but God divided mercy into 99 parts. Gave one to creation. And this includes everything like the mercy that a mother gives her newborn is included in that, and reserved 99 for himself. This is to show, or at least give a better, more apprehensible example of the amount of mercy God shows to his creation. Anytime you sin, ask for forgiveness. Allah will say, anytime you call for me, I will be there for you. There is, every chapter of the Quran starts with, except for one, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It was even in Surah Al-Fatiha. The most beneficent, the most merciful. And that superlative, it's the rest of those 99 things. So all the mercy that we actually see that is so profound, that brings us to tears, that is just like 1%. And I mean, I don't want to reduce it to a mathematical thing, but Allah is the most merciful, or God is the most merciful to a level, to a magnitude that we cannot even comprehend. Does that answer your question? Okay. So, to the slides, Islam has two major holidays. Eid al-Fitr, the breaking of the fast, it commemorates the end of Ramadan, and you're actually forbidden to fast this day. The saying goes, the only person that fasts on this day is Satan. So you cannot actually, you have to hang out, enjoy, party, visit friends, visit family, and partake in all the things that you did not. The Prophet was actually very worried that people would live such a monastic life that they wouldn't enjoy the good things of this world. I don't want to say any hedonistic implications, but it's like he was worried that his Sahaba, his companions, would try to outdo each other by fasting more. It was like, I'm going to fast for 24 hours. I'm going to fast for 48 hours. They're like, no, that's why every Muslim actually has to break their fast at sunset. You have to. You can't go longer than that, no matter who you are, no matter how saintly you think you are, no matter how holy you think you are, you have to break the fast. And even at the end of Ramadan, you have to actually enjoy Eid. Eid al-Adha, Feast of the Sacrifice, marks the end of Hajj. It also, it's again going back to my earlier comment, it's the story of Abraham. We actually believe it was the different son, it was Ishmael, not Isaac, but it is the same story, and we actually sacrifice an animal in the same way that Abraham did instead of actually sacrificing his son. So these are our two big holidays. This is more analogous to Christmas, but only in principle, going back to that point. Any questions about that?
Is Ramadan the same month every year, or does it shift from one month to the next?
It is the same month in the Islamic calendar, but the Islamic calendar is based on a lunar calendar system. So 11 days shorter, it works backward through the solar year. So it is the same month, if you're talking about the Islamic month, which is, the month is Ramadan, that's the name. So it's the same month, it's Ramadan. It's like, when's Christmas? December 25th. But it is different in terms of dates. So, for instance, when I was in college, Ramadan was in the winter, which was great because the sun sets at like 5 o'clock. Now, sun sets at almost 9 o'clock, so the fasts are actually very long. But we're actually, again, working backwards through the year. We, over the last maybe 5, 6, let's say decade, we've hit through the hard summer, the long summer. Now we're approaching May, I think. So getting a little bit easier. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Wanted to ask a question about culture and what goes into the decision-making process for a woman to decide whether to wear the hijab or not.
Good question. I actually didn't touch, so I wanted to get to the role of the imam, and there was a kind of ecclesiastical hierarchy question in the prompt. So I avoided Muslim dress and architecture and art, because those are big unto themselves. But I think, I I, as a man, don't like answering the question, but my wife can answer it.
And this is the last question, by the way, to answer. I don't think I can answer it as theologically as he would answer it. I'm not a scholar. I haven't studied Islam to the level that he has. But if I were to answer the question, I'd say culture is very different from Islam. So there are many cultures that, sorry, Zaid, there are many cultures that fall under the umbrella of Islam, right? You have Indians, you have Afghanis, you have Saudi Arabians, you have Africans, and Africans is not one culture, it's many different countries that make up. So when you talk about cultures, you have Islam represents or many different cultures. So culture is different. When it comes to a woman's choice of covering, the Quran does prescribe being modest. And I won't get into the many different sort of interpretations of what that means, but as far as culture driving whether or not you cover, it's a very loaded question because everybody has a different thought. But when it boils down to it, I truly believe it is your own choice as a woman. It shouldn't be something that comes from your dad telling you that you have to do it, or somebody or your husband telling you that you have to do it. It should really come from within. And so it is your personal choice. Now, there are many cultures where you will see that many people do cover, more people do cover, more women do cover. They'll wear the hijab, or they'll wear, the niqab. And hopefully that is each by their own choice. But because it is a cultural thing there, more people feel like it's just the thing that you do. And so, coming down to it again, if I were to answer it, I say it is your choice as to how you choose to be modest. But I think he'll add to that.
So I think, because I don't want to cut her off per se, I just want to make sure that we're giving attention to folks. The injunction is to dress modestly, and that's for both men and women. If you look at traditional dress, even in the Gulf now, men cover their heads. They wear the higal, that red kind of checkerboard thing that drapes over the back, and you cover yourself from your head to your toe. On the one level, that's pragmatic because the sun is very abusive in the Gulf, and you can't go out covering a lot of skin. But the injunction for Muslims is to cover yourself. And dress modestly, to be aware of that. How people actually execute that in terms of their culture does differ. What a Nigerian, as my wife said, what a Nigerian will wear is different from what an Indonesian will wear, different from an Uzbek will wear, but the injunction is the same. I'm going to leave it at that. Did that answer your question? So the answer is not the sun. That was just an example. The sun is not like the causal thing. But my point there was to say, with traditional dress, Muslims will cover. And you do see it now, I'll tell you, like men will be wearing like skinny jeans and Armani t-shirts, and the ladies are still wearing traditional dress. So I do get that. But my comment was to literally kind of argue against that the traditional dress is similar for both men and women.
What I'm saying is that the men are wearing white because it's hot in the sun, but that's not wearing white they're wearing.
Right.
But the women are still wearing black. Let them wear white at least. It's a choice, but the men.
The question was about why men wear white and why women wear black, and that is more of a cultural thing in the Gulf rather than an Islamic injunction. There is no, from a point of Islamic law, women are not supposed to wear black and men to wear white.
One last question, if it's quick. I'm sure Robert's going to come in here.
Describe the role of the imam.
So the hadith of Gabriel, so I don't know if I'll be able to answer that quickly. But, so the word imam literally means in front, the one in front. The word amama is like a preposition in Arabic, which means in front of. So we get the word imam. The imam is the person who stands in front of prayer. I don't think that's what folks are asking per se, if I may be so bold as to say that. But the reason I went, I told you about my digression in the first instance, the Hadith of Gabriel talks about the 3 levels of what we call this thing called Islam. Sorry, I'm clicking too much. We have Islam, which I believe, Doctor, if I talked about these were your 5 pillars. This is usually the domain traditionally of what's in Arabic, the yed, the hand, the action. Concept in Latin, and my topical joke for folks, even Lutherans know we can't escape Latin, right? Orthopraxy. Not a word we generally use. We know Orthodox, we know the Orthodox Church, we know orthodoxy, ortho, correct, doxy, belief, I believe. But it refers to the head. That goes to Iman, or faith. The second one that spoke about, no, the first one. The first bold section. What is faith? Faith is to believe in God, his angels, meeting with him, the apostles, and the resurrection. That's what we would call the domain of theology. These were called the mutakallimun, or the mufassirin. These were the people, the exegetes, the people who actually talked about what the Quran meant. This is a domain of what you may think of as the imam. But the imam actually transcends all of these things. I think to answer the question, you have orthodoxy, correct belief, which was the domain of the theologians. Orthopraxy, which was correct praxis, which was the domain of the jurists. This is about Sharia. Sharia is not, you hear it on maybe talk radio or get a different, this is Sharia is orthopraxy. Or another way of saying what we as Muslims will be asked about, on the day of judgment. It has nothing to do with kind of the other stuff you hear about. But what is the right way to pray? What is the right way to dress? And people can debate these things. For instance, should women cover their hair? Should men cover their hair? And believe it or not, some schools, men should be covering. It's actually immodest for me to be, well, I don't have hair, but a separate story. And then Ihsan is really the balance between the two things, orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Arabic calls this iman, which is faith, wa amal meaning action. But we have this in Christianity too, faith and practice. And it's the balance between the two things. But the imam is just the prayer leader. We will say we might take a sheikh to give us spiritual instruction who will balance between the two things to kind of elevate ourselves. So Ihsan, you would have like what's the domain of Sufism, Tasawwuf. You would have a sheikh to maybe guide you in that. So I think the simple answer, the role of the imam, is to lead prayer. The broader question is there's multiple words in Arabic to describe different functions, but they're all there to kind of go back to this Hadith of Gabriel, the balance between orthodoxy and orthopraxy.
Sorry, we have a worship service
Nope.
at 11 o'clock. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all for coming. Tariq, thank you. And Neha, thank you. You're welcome back anytime.